If I were to tell you that Aleister Crowley, Ross Nichols, and Gerald Gardner shared a very important thing in common, would you call me a liar? And no, it's not just that they all practice some form of magic. No, they had an idea. They were part of a movement that is still trying to change the world. They were part of a grand paradigm shift in our consciousness when it comes to spirituality, religion, and magic. It's one that I think we need to talk about more and really challenge the other side. This is the episode about the real culture war that we're going to be talking about today as we walk together. Hello, everyone. My name is Charlie. I am a Pagan Druid and priest of Bridget.
Hello, everyone. My name is Brian. I'm a Pagan Druid and sous chef to the Dogda.
Today, we're going to be talking about the one thing that Aleister Crowley, Gerald Gardner, and Ross Nichols have in common. Now, if you're not familiar with these three people, Aleister Crowley is a very pivotal, seminal figure in the history of magic and the wide scale adoption of esoteric thought. Gerald Gardner is the founder of Wicca, and one of the two reasons that paganism has really taken off in the modern world. Ross Nichols is that other reason, and he is the mind and soul behind the modern Druid revival. While the Druid revival started several hundred years before he was born, he crystallized it and gave it the strength that it has, and his disciples are to this day at the forefront of the Druid revival. What did they have in common? A very concerted belief that the old sacrifice-based pain and suffering model, asceticism model of spirituality, what we in creation spirituality would refer to as the fall redemption model of salvation, is over. That we've moved into another age, another time, another place where if we are going to find enlightenment, illumination, spiritual awakening, it's going to be through finding our true selves and in aligning ourselves with nature. And that is a huge shift in consciousness. We really need to talk about that and realize how these three very different schools of thought converge on this one thing. But before we get into all that, if you haven't already, don't forget to like, subscribe, follow, whatever the terminology happens to be on whatever app you're listening to us on. We do original Pagan and Druid episodes 5 days a week, Monday through Friday. And you don't want to miss anything. We're currently going through our Druidry 101 series, and you don't want to miss it.
Sounds like the setup for almost like a bad joke, like Aleister Crowley, Ross Nichols, and Gerald Gardner walk into a bar one day.
I know, I almost started the episode like that. So
oh, gosh.
I'm very much of the opinion that so long as society lives long enough for us to get there, we're going to look back at the period between the 1880s and the 1960s as the second axial age. And if you're not familiar with that term, the axial age is the term that's used for this period of history at about 500 BC, 600 to 500 BC, where all of our modern ideas kind of came about. It's during this period of history that we have the Buddha, we have the reforms that are happening, the monotheism, the prophetic movement that is happening within Judaism. We have a lot of reforms that are happening to Greek philosophy and Greek religion that are happening at this time. And we can follow this across the board into major changes that are happening in Hinduism. This is probably around the time that Taoism is starting to form. It's this moment where philosophically the world tilted on its axis. Like the whole way of thinking globally just kind of changed. And in this very profound period that we find so many of the biggest movements and thoughts that we're still grappling with and coming to terms with today happen. And it's my conjecture, and I'm not 100% sure that it's over. I think that we could bring other names into this pantheon of all of the great thinkers that arised during this time period, but you can see how everything changes from this period of the 1880s through to the 1960s. And up to today, but I think we're too close to anything after the 1960s to say something had a lasting effect. You know what I'm saying? It's still too soon to start elevating anyone after the 60s into that pantheon of, oh, these are the thinkers that we're going to be remembering for a long time. It's during this age that we have everything from Einstein's immense paradigm shift on how we understand the world through general and special relativity. We have the rise of these psychological movements and a very strong understanding of the mind, where the West finally starts catching up to where India and the Indian philosophers and the Chinese philosophers have been for millennia. By this point, we have the West really catching up in a lot of ways on this kind of psychological, spiritual awakening that was really happening. Now, part of this was the belief in the coming of the Aquarian age, that we were leaving the Piscean age and entering the Aquarian age. I'm sure you've heard that terminology before, even if it's just from that song, It's the Dawning of the Age of Aquarius. This is an idea that was born during the spiritualist revolution that was happening in the 1880s, well, starting in the 1870s through the 1880s. That, again, for people who want to wall it off and say that it stopped happening, this is the dawn of mediumship. This is where channelers are first really brought into the vocabulary, and we still have people that practice these arts and professions to this day, right? These changes that happen to us psychologically all started in this time period. And what Aleister Crowley, Ross Nichols, and Gerald Gardner really understood is, one, religion and spirituality is going to move into a very active, participatory, initiatory system. And it's not just them. There were others that I could include in here. Dion Fortune and what she was doing with both Jesus Lodge in London, as well as the Society for the Society for the Inner Light. We could include other names like Gareth Knight in here. And I mean, I could just keep going and rattling off names. Israel Regardie is doing his work in this time period as well. But we see this kind of opening of spirituality, so that all of the secrets that you had to go to seminary for, all of the secrets that you had to hunt down, the secret lost tomes, they're all becoming publicly available. All of the Christian scholars are starting to post their books and print their stories explaining the actual histories that we know from the land, what we actually know from textual criticism, what we actually know from the manuscripts. We see people questioning the more traditional translations and trying to get back into what the text actually said. This is a huge shift in spirituality and philosophy. And I'm trying to focus just in on the spirituality stuff because that's what we do here for the most part. It's hard for us, because we are the benefactors of that change, to understand how much the world is different after these shifts than it was before it.
One of the things I like to keep in mind when I'm thinking about how different it is you gotta imagine they were right at the cusp of the birth of a far more mobile society. Cars and buses were just starting to go into use. They were hobbyists at their point in time, but it wasn't much later when they started becoming more popularly used. So the public themselves could move around so much freer and easier. Because before that, there was trains and horse and buggy, carts,
Well,
walking, and trains were only
tra-
from one point to another.
well, trains
You
are
had
a huge part of the story, because
yeah,
first time you could actually get on a train in Paris.
yeah, this was at the beginning of that, even being a long commuter journey like that being possible. Communication itself was in its infancy, like, there was telegraphs and whatnot, but phones were just about to roll out, like,
And
we
it's hard
think
to
about
imagine
phones
what
as being archaic now. Like, we're like, I know a lot of people are just like myself, where it's like, "I'll just send a text, I don't even want a phone call." But this is a period when phones are about to come into play. Like, we call somebody across the Atlantic, be in London, and talk to somebody in New York
and
instantaneously.
And the actual change that's going on here, the actual real power dynamic that is being talked about by these three men that are on the docket today, is one that's going away from submissive power to one of personal liberation and access to all of this. So prior to the reforms that are starting to happen, remember Aleister Crowley was a part of the Golden Dawn, the original Golden Dawn. He had his infamous magical duel with Yeats and the others in the London Temple before the temple completely collapsed and fell, which I love to just point out, I guess means Aleister won the magic battle there. Those lodges still had hierarchies to them. They were breaking open, right? This is why I don't include the Golden Dawn in on this list. They were just starting to open up. The Golden Dawn is immensely important in this time period because they allowed not only women to be members, but women to rise through the ranks. Moira Mathers is probably more important to the history of the Golden Dawn than McGregor was, her husband. And her husband is one of the founders of the order. But Moira is probably more important in that story than he is. And so this rise of female empowerment that is starting to happen within these movements where women are not being as held back. There still was sexism in these spaces, but they were not as held back as they would have been, say, in a Catholic where you have to go be a silent nun over there in the corner. You're not allowed in the priesthood. You can't actually get close to the actual mysteries. And that was also true in the Presbyterians, the Anglicans, all of the other Christian mainstream movements that existed at the time, and all of the other movements. Buddhist nuns were not given the same autonomy that Buddhist monks were, and the rest. So we see this personal liberation starting to filter in and really elevate a lot of voices that would not have normally been heard. It's based in this very core idea. This is so essential to understanding Druid craft, Druid, and magic in general. That is, we are not here to obey human masters. We're not even here to obey spiritual masters. That's the difference between these movements and what we see in a lot of what came out of the Theosophical Society. We are here to participate in the divine mysteries and to find our true face. We are here to become what we are. We're here to fulfill the promise of Scripture that we were made in the image of God. This is the work, granted cloaked under different metaphors and stories, that Aleister Crowley, Ross Nichols, and Gerald Gardner were all pushing towards. It's also important to remember that we know Gerald Gardner went to visit Aleister Crowley before he established the first Wiccan order. We know that they talked about it. We know that he was inspired by Aleister Crowley's work with the AA and with which is the Aurelia Aurora. People are thinking I'm talking about Alcoholics Anonymous. Aleister Crowley worked with it was one of the offshoot secondary versions of the Golden Dawn. It was the Aurelia Aurora, the A or the AA, as it's often referred to, and Aleister Crowley's work with the OTO, the Ordo Templi Orientis, which he founded, and was looking at establishing that kind of initiatory order. Ross Nichols, when you actually read the works of Ross Nichols, he envisioned Druidry very much in the mold of something like the lodge system that we see in the OTO or other organizations. He actually has the temple space, the sacred space laid out with officers and everything, much like you would have seen in those older orders. This, of course, matures and changes over time, and Philip Carr-Gomm brought even more changes to it. But there's no limits put on. There's no sacrifices that have to be done. It's not about aestheticism. And it's hard to express to us today, for a lot of us today, how much of a change that is and why that caused so many people to just write some of the vilest things about Aleister Crowley, Ross Nichols, and Gerald Gardner in the press. Gerald Gardner, if he was discussed at all, was that kooky old guy. Ross Nichols was treated like a joke. And Aleister Crowley was demonized in the press in ways that are very familiar to us today. If he were around today, we would probably see him as genderqueer. He was definitely queer. He was bisexual, and very openly so. He lived for several years under the name of Alice. He's challenging gender and sexuality norms and doing everything that he can to elevate the women around him, really creating this kind of queer collective around him in a time period where we didn't have words for any of this.
That's the thing. As we're going through this chapter, the ways of love, if you're wondering, what do these three have to do with it? They have a lot to do with it because a lot of what they were teaching was born out of this place of love, this unity of two paths. Even the parts about the tree of life, like all three of them had that from their esoteric backgrounds and their Kabbalic studies. The sacredness of the human body was really engendered in all of their teachings. All three of
The,
them,
the sacredness of
really, really
sexuality.
sacredness of sexuality. They were the forefathers that helped to birth that revolution that later would manifest in the 60s, in the 1960s,
Especially
almost
Aleister
100
Crowley.
years later. Yeah, especially Aleister Crowley.
It is hard to imagine the 60s happening without him because so many of the people that we would mark as influential change agents for the culture read him. They may not have
Mhm,
practiced what he was doing, right? They may not have become Thelemites or actually practiced any of the magic, but they were reading what he was writing because he was putting forward this philosophy. When I say that this is the real culture war, the war started in the 1880s. And it is this idea of how do you find God? Is it through self reflection, growth, and basically becoming the best version of yourself? Or is it through abject asceticism and obedience? This is the culture war that starts in the 1880s. And if you actually want to see the power of this, there was a book that was channeled in, I believe it was in 1888, called The Aquarian Gospel of Jesus Christ. It is a trippy read because it is basically a retelling of the gospel, but in an extremely proto hippie sort of way. Cause this is again like 100 years before the hippies, but really connecting to these ideas of it's not about the sacrifice. It's not about the suffering. It's not about obedience to higher powers. It's about learning who you are and connecting to your true self and your true identity. We see this in the works of Peter Notovich and his found gospels in Tibet, which big asterisks, big stars all around that. His gospel where he claims to have found Jesus's lost years in Tibet. There is some debate over whether or not he mixed together several stories that he heard when he was there to compile this, or if he wrote it out of whole cloth. It's that one thing that we can say is he did not find the lost years of Jesus, but he presented it that way, and people got excited about it because these show Jesus going to Tibet and learning meditation and learning this kind of growth through spiritual awakening and through self growth, and not through treating the body with contempt, not through the rejection of all pleasure and life. Which, by the way, yeah, for read the Gospels, like you don't have to go outside of the Gospels. Jesus is all about having the good life. I've come that you shall have life and have it more abundantly. He's at all the parties. He's there, bring joy and the fun into the world and combating the very forces that we're still fighting today. This is the culture war that got started all the way back then, because the reaction to the actual knowledge about what the scripture says and this new spiritualism that was arising, that was encouraging people to seek their true selves, to find out what it is that they wanted to do, was such a threat that we have the rise of fundamentalism. We forget now, because again, we've grown up with this word. The word fundamentalism comes back to a movement that literally published a series of books called The Fundamentals. These fundamentals include the old hits of biblical inerrancy and obedience to power, and men are always right, everyone else is wrong. White men especially are always right and everybody else is always wrong. All the hits. And this where that side started fighting back. This is the actual culture war. Are you trying to find out who you are and to live your best, most authentic life? Or are you going to be subservient to the will of others? This is the real culture. And we're seeing it come to a head right now in the United States and around the world in other countries. This is the shift that is trying to happen in our consciousness. And it's rooted in these philosophical and scientific, psychological movements that start in the late 1800s. I love to use Aleister Crowley as the poster child for a lot of this because he studied Jung, he studied Freud. He's right at the heart of all this, from the magic to the psychology. He was fascinated with the sciences and was trying to turn magic itself into a science. He is a very interesting individual, and I do not agree with him on a lot of things. I have to say that off the bat. I have become kind of a defender of him in the last several years of my life because there's just so many lies and mistruths and half truths around him. And it shrouds how important he actually is to a lot of the changes that we are having today, because it's the reactions to him. We have the satanic panic. We had the satanic panic because of Aleister Crowley. It starts with
Yes.
him while he was still alive and continues after him. Anton LaVey, the founder of the First Church of Satan, was a fan of Aleister Crowley's and cribbed a
It's
lot of his ideas.
Yeah, having grown up in the satanic panic, it's where I got a lot of my negative opinions about Aleister Crowley and beliefs, and a lot of the false accusations and misrepresentation of things from his life or from their life. Probably would go with it. Hey,
We
either
don't
way,
know. We don't know.
we don't know. They're not around now. A lot of those false thoughts came out of that very satanic panic. It's been really fascinating learning more and realizing, yeah, there's a lot of things I would have disagreed with. I think had they been around in the modern day, they too would have disagreed and found the correction for their things. It's just a part of the process, part of that discovery, especially for somebody being earlier in that process and far more advanced than everybody else in their contemporary culture.
Because he's in that same boat with people like H.G. Wells, who people don't realize what a radical, socialistic, free thinking, free love, believing in the rights of women person he was. This literally is a huge change in consciousness that's happening around this time. And I have to stress, when I say this is the real culture war, there are distractions in this culture war. The culture war is not about should we have religion or should we not have religion. See, that's a distraction. This whole new atheist versus evangelical Christian thing. Because as we learned, the new atheists are on the wrong side of the culture war. They're all into asceticism. Can't have imagination. Imagination is bad, says Richard Dawkins. They're all about promoting hatred of other people. And we see that problem. And I'm not saying that you can't be an atheist. I'm just saying that movement, that distraction tactic that came in to try to recuperate a lot of this language and take it away from those of us who actually are out there fighting the culture war. It was a distraction, because the question's not, should we have religion or not? The question is, should we obey authorities or not? That's always the question. That is the heart of this culture war. And whether you are practicing meditation alone in your house, whether you are part of a meditation group, whether you are a magical practitioner, a member of a coven, a member of any of the orders that are out there, and what you have to realize is, are you in a cult or are you in a actual spiritual tradition? Because I would argue the most dangerous cults right now have mainstream labels on them. They have mainstream
Yeah.
tags on them because a cult is a high control group. If you can't ask questions, if you can't question the leadership, if you can't think outside the rigid dogma that's being placed upon you, you are in a cult. It doesn't matter how many million members or billion members that cult has. That is a cult. That is a high control group. And that is a dangerous thing. That is the real culture war. See, on our side, I don't care if you practice Druidry, Wicca, Buddhism, Hinduism, Islam, Judaism, or nothing at all. If you're just living your best life the best you can, I want you to do that. I want you to live your best life, however you want to do that, because I know in my heart of hearts that other people's practices don't affect mine. There's not that fragility that exists in a high control faith where if other people don't agree with me, then maybe I'm wrong. Look, I know that I'm wrong. I'm just groping around in the dark like the rest of us, trying to figure out, is that a snake, a tree, a rope, a wall? I'm trying to figure out what the elephant is like the rest of us, right?
That's why
And
a lot of it boils down when I'm looking at things is Are you being fed compliance? Are you being fed choice? Which one? Because a lot of it, you can boil it down to that. And like you said, the high control groups, the cults, the imperial churches, as we like to label them, they feed compliance. You must obey X, Y, and Z. And the other option, the other way, is you feed choice. Because choice is when you go, here's a path for a better life. You could walk on the sidewalk because that'll keep you safe from traffic and make it easier to walk and be less stress on your joints and a lot easier on your feet. But you have the choice to walk where you want to walk. That's giving choice. Compliance is going, walk on this sidewalk or else we will penalize you
with violence.
with violence.
And threats of hell are coercive.
Threats of hell are violence.
That's violence. Especially because, and I have to stress this a lot, hell is not in the Bible. I'm going to say this one more time. Hell is not in the Bible. I don't know how many episodes we're going to end up doing on that one topic, because we've already kind of covered it a bit already. But the hell that people wholeheartedly believe in is a product of the Middle Ages and the high control cult that was taking over the world at the time. It's not in the Bible. It's not in scripture. It's not there. It was made up in the Middle Ages. I'm one of those people that's like, make up your own faith. If you're having a hard time connecting with things and the only thing that makes sense to you is the Silmarillion, then practice that. I'm not one of those people that's like, it has to be old or ancient or be rooted in some historical blah, blah, blah. I don't think any of that matters because it's all metaphor anyway. Even the real stuff is metaphor when it's used in spiritual practice. You have to find your own path. And if you're not realizing that is the war, that is the culture war that we're currently fighting. All these other things, why are people so against queer rights and trans rights? Because they want to control them. Why are people opposed to women's rights? Because they want to control them. Why are people not wanting social justice and wanting to oppress Black people and Latinos? To control them. It's always been a culture war between freedom and liberation on the one side and high control, hierarchical dominance on the other. And I know which side I'm on. I'm against hierarchies. I've been very clear about this for a long time on this podcast. I am an anarchist at heart. I think the system or structure could have to prove its right to exist regularly, not just get to exist until we can prove it shouldn't be there. I think it needs to prove constantly, this is why I'm here. If we're going to put a system of control into effect, the burden is on it to justify its own existence. And for a lot of these movements and for a lot of these causes, they can't. This is a spur of the moment thought right now. And I can't remember who he was talking to, but one of the first, I think it was the first episode of the New Evangelicals for this year. Tim talked to a gentleman, and the whole point of the episode is 2025 is the year you leave your church. We can't be continuing to try to do the reform from the inside. We've been trying to do reform from the inside for decades, sometimes centuries. If they're not going to change, they're not going to change. We need to leave. We need to start our own things. We need to make this year and our lives about liberation, about freedom, about liberty, and about rejecting these high control hierarchies and this desire for dominance.
This is also some of the lessons we can learn from the story of Angus and the Swan. It's about choice. You can't force that compliance. Forcing the compliance is wrong. When, as soon as the doctor realized that the other person didn't have that choice to make because the Swan was more powerful than the other king, the doctor was like, I'm sorry, dude, let him out of prison. It's like, my bad, go free. Angus went. And the other part of that choice, the other part of that story is, what do we want to be in union with? What is our swan?
Well, that's the whole image of liberation there. Are you willing to become a swan?
Are you willing? Yeah, finding your swan and joining in union with it. All three of them did that.
And yeah, Angus went from wanting to basically possess this woman to literally transforming into what she was.
Yeah.
He was willing to become his truer, better, freer self, literally sprouting wings.
Sprouting wings and reaches out off.
As he reaches for her, his arms turn into wings and he flies off with her. This is what we're about. It's this liberation. It's this realization that we are not here to control. We're not here to own. We're not here to dominate. We're here to live in blessed, beloved community with each other and to
And
bring liberation. Jesus said we are here to bring liberation, to set the captives free, to heal the crushed. That's the mission. That is the mission. And that's the real culture war. And yes, it's easy to get distracted into the side quests. And I'm not saying the side quests aren't important. When they're going after the least of us, when they're going after any of us, we need to be there. We need to show up. We need to protest. We need to be there as a strong voice and fight against all that. But realize that's not really what the fight is about. That is a distraction from them saying, no, 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 we deserve all the power. No, you don't. You don't deserve the power. We, the collective we, the community we have the power. We are the power. And you, Mr. Man, are just a functionary. You are there to do what we want and what we've told you to do. That's where the real power is, in that we. And when the power gets shrunk down to an I, or it gets pointed specifically at a you, but you, that's where we need to start watching out. We need to start being careful, because this is really the struggle that we're in. And hopefully it's a struggle that we will all wake up to and have the strength and courage to fight. I hope this episode helped you out. There are times when I feel like I'm preaching to the choir on this podcast, and in a lot of ways I am, though I do see the comments every now and then where somebody comes in and says, I never thought about it that way. I've never seen it that way. And that means a lot to me. And I apologize if you feel like I'm just preaching to the choir. I hope we're being motivational. I hope we're giving you tools. I hope that we're giving you just, if nothing else, the encouragement and the empowerment to go out there and to live your best, freest life and to find that liberation for yourself. I would love to know in the comments what your thoughts about any of this is, whether it's the Aquarian Piscean age thing, whether it's, if you have any thoughts about Aleister Crowley, Ross Nichols, or Gerald Gardner. If you have any thoughts about any of this, let me know in the comments. If you're listening to us on YouTube or Spotify, you can leave a comment right there. If you're listening to us anywhere else, even if they say you can leave a comment, they won't let us know. So leave a comment there anyway, because engagement is magic. And then head over to creationpaths.com and click on chat, and you can leave us some comment there, and we will see it and be able to get back. While you're there, if you happen to have a few dollars you can throw our way, we offer monthly and annual memberships. You can also support us on Patreon and Ko-fi. I am CE Dorset on both. And we have a Cash App cash tag, which is hashtag Creations Paths, where you can support us directly. Thank you to everyone who does that. You all are amazing. You really help us keep the lights on, keep a roof over our head, and just keep us going in everything that we do. If you don't have any money right now, or you don't feel like giving, you're not sure that we're the kind of people that you want to give your hard-earned treasure to, that's 100% okay. But if we've ever done anything that really moved you, helped you, or you think will help others, please share it with them. That helps us out more than you could possibly know. All right. And as we're heading out,
I should finish that joke from earlier. Aleister Crowley, Ross Nichols, and Gerald Gardner walk into a bar one day. Gardner goes, look, an oak bar top. And Crowley goes, nope, manifest destiny.
oh, that's so bad. That's so bad.